The flight was supposed to be routine, first-class comfort, a billionaire's family heading home after a luxury vacation. But within minutes of takeoff, a piercing cry broke through the calm. The billionaire's baby wouldn't stop screaming, no matter what the mother tried. Passengers rolled their eyes, flight attendants whispered, and frustration filled the cabin. Then, from the back of the plane, a young black boy, traveling alone, dressed in worn clothes, stood up. People stared. Some frowned. What could he possibly do? But what happened next silenced the entire plane, and revealed something no one could have expected. By the time they landed, the billionaire's life would be forever changed. Because sometimes, compassion comes from the seat you least expect. But who was this boy, and what did he do that left even the coldest hearts in tears? Before we begin, where are you watching this from? Let me know in the comments. For 10-year-old Malik, flying was a dream he never thought would come true. He had never been on a plane before, never even been outside his small neighborhood in Atlanta. His ticket wasn't luxury or luck, it was charity. A local church had sponsored a few kids from low-income families to visit relatives for the holidays. Malik was one of them, quiet, polite, and curious about everything. He clutched his worn backpack as he walked through the airport, eyes wide at the endless lines and glittering stores. The world felt too big, too loud. People brushed past him without a glance, dressed in suits and designer shoes. He didn't mind, he was used to being invisible. His seat was at the very back of the plane, squeezed between two strangers who barely looked his way. But Malik didn't complain. He pressed his face to the window, watching the clouds rise as the city disappeared below. Up in first class, life looked different. Silk suits, champagne glasses, and quiet luxury. Among them sat Charles Wentworth, a billionaire tech investor whose face often appeared on magazine covers. To most, he was success personified. But that day, all anyone saw was a man desperately trying to calm his crying baby as frustration spread across the cabin. Malik couldn't help but notice the commotion. He watched the mother's trembling hands, the father's clenched jaw, and the other passengers' impatient sighs. Something in him felt uneasy. He didn't know it yet, but that single moment of compassion, born from a child's heart, was about to turn into a story that would make headlines around the world. The baby's cries grew louder, echoing through the cabin like a siren no one could escape. Passengers exchanged frustrated glances. Some muttered under their breath. Others pressed the call button for the flight attendants, demanding something be done. The billionaire's wife rocked the baby helplessly, tears forming in her eyes. Charles Wentworth, used to controlling everything in his world, sat frozen, embarrassed, his expensive suit wrinkled and patience fading. From the back, Malik watched it all unfold. He could see the exhaustion on the mother's face, the judgment in the passenger's eyes, and the helpless anger in the father's clenched fists. No one seemed willing to help. No one even tried. It was the kind of silence Malik knew well, the kind that said some people's problems don't matter. Then, as the baby's cries turned desperate, a flight attendant approached Malik's row. She smiled tightly, but her eyes carried frustration. "Would you mind keeping your voice down, sweetheart?" she whispered, even though Malik hadn't said a word. She was looking at the wrong person, but didn't seem to care. Malik nodded anyway. He was used to that, too. Moments later, turbulence shook the plane. A drink spilled across Malik's lap, soaking his only pair of jeans. He stood to grab napkins, just as the baby let out another heart-wrenching scream. Passengers groaned. The mother buried her face in her hands. And then, Malik moved. He walked down the aisle, barefoot now because his shoes were too wet to wear, clutching a small stuffed bear from his backpack. His grandmother had given it to him years ago, something to keep him brave when the world got cold. He didn't think twice. He just acted. But as he approached first class, a tall man in a dark suit blocked his way. "You don't belong up here, kid," he said sharply. Heads turned. A few people whispered. Malik froze, the bear clutched in his hand. He tried to explain that he just wanted to help the baby, but the man's voice rose, drawing more attention. "Back to your seat. Now." The tension thickened. The baby's cries, the murmurs, the humiliation, it all blurred together. Malik's throat tightened, his cheeks burned. He turned to leave. But then, something unexpected happened. From the front, the billionaire's wife looked up, her eyes red, her face pale, and said quietly, "Let him come." The man hesitated. The passengers fell silent. Malik, heart pounding, stepped forward. He approached the baby, held out the bear, and began humming softly, a tune his grandmother used to sing. Within seconds, the crying slowed. Then stopped. For a moment, the entire plane seemed to hold its breath. No one spoke. No one moved. The same people who had rolled their eyes now stared in disbelief. The flight attendants stood frozen. The man who stopped him a minute ago looked away. Malik didn't stay for praise. He simply smiled, placed the bear in the baby's lap, and whispered, "It's okay now." Then he turned to go back to his seat. But as he walked down the aisle, he heard it, quiet at first, then louder. Someone laughed. Someone muttered, "Guess even poor kids can be useful sometimes." Another voice chuckled, "Bet he's done this before." Each word hit harder than the last. The moment of kindness was already being twisted. Malik sat back down, staring at his empty hands, trying to understand why doing the right thing could still make him feel so small. Up front, Charles Wentworth looked down at the bear, worn, stitched, and stained, and then at his peaceful child. Something inside him shifted. He didn't know it yet, but this brief encounter was about to become the story that would haunt him and change everything he thought he knew about class, color, and compassion. Days after the flight, Malik's story began to spread, not because he told it, but because someone had recorded that moment when he handed the bear to the crying baby. The clip went viral overnight. People called him the boy with the heart of gold. Comment sections filled with praise, tears, and outrage. But Malik didn't see himself as a hero. He was just a kid who tried to help. Meanwhile, Charles Wentworth couldn't forget that day. He replayed it in his mind, how easily people judged, how silence almost made him complicit. For years, he had spoken about empathy and leadership, but that day showed him the difference between words and action. He tried to reach Malik. When he finally did, he offered scholarships, donations, and publicity. But Malik didn't want fame. All he asked was something simple: if people like you really care, make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. That conversation changed Charles. He began funding programs to support underprivileged youth, hiring from communities society often ignored. Not out of guilt, but because one boy had shown him what compassion looked like, stripped of privilege and expectation. As for Malik, life moved on. He went back to school, carrying the same backpack, the same quiet humility. But now, when he looked at the sky, he didn't just see clouds, he saw possibility. He had faced the sting of discrimination in the most public way imaginable, yet he never let it harden his heart. The world eventually forgot the viral clip. The comments stopped. The news cycle moved on. But Malik's story remains a mirror, one that forces us to ask why acts of kindness from black children are met with suspicion, why poverty still shapes how people are seen, and why humanity still needs proof to believe goodness can come from anywhere. If stories like this move you, hit subscribe, because more voices like Malik's deserve to be heard. Because the truth is, Malik's story isn't rare, it's just the one we happen to notice. There are countless others, unseen, unheard, waiting for someone to believe in them before the world judges them. Maybe the question isn't what Malik did, but what we didn't. How many times will we let compassion be silenced by prejudice? How many children will have to prove their worth before we learn to see them for who they are? This was one flight, one boy, one act of kindness. But if a single gesture from a poor black child could calm a billionaire's world, imagine what could happen if we all started listening before assuming, helping before judging, and loving before fearing. That's not just Malik's story. That's a challenge to all of us.